The Supreme Court struck down most of President Trump's global tariffs today in a 6-3 decision that is a major blow to his economic agenda.
The court ruled that President Trump did not have the authority under a 1977 economic emergency law to issue such sweeping tariffs. The president responded forcefully, using sharp language to criticize the justices who ruled against him, calling them unpatriotic and disloyal to the Constitution. At a press conference, he said he would move forward regardless, vowing to impose a global 10% across-the-board tariff under a different law.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. The Democrats on the court are thrilled, but they will automatically vote no. They're against anything that makes America strong, healthy, and great again.
Hey everyone, Ben here, and we're back on the air. 3 appellate judges delivered what legal veterans call the most devastating judicial rebuke in modern history, systematically dismantling every argument Trump's legal team presented. The former president, who once boasted of his invincibility, discovered that federal judges operate on a different standard. The courtroom witnessed a judicial execution of his entire legal strategy. The lead judge, a seasoned jurist known for her careful deliberation, didn't waste time with pleasantries. She launched directly into the ruling, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who had reviewed the evidence, examined the arguments, and found them completely without foundation. The phrase "meritless" echoed through the chamber like a death knell, appearing not once but multiple times throughout the decision. When federal judges employ such language, they aren't simply rejecting a case. They're sending a clear message that the arguments presented were so fundamentally flawed that they bordered on frivolous.
This is one of the most significant cases that the justices have decided in recent years. Here, the Supreme Court ruling that President Trump's use of these emergency tariffs that he has implemented are illegal. It's the most significant economic case to reach the high court in years, sweeping implications for the economy and, of course, for presidential power. And at stake here are billions of dollars in revenue that have already been collected by the government. Pamela Wolf, the other significance here is that this is the first time that the 6-3 conservative court has ruled against President Trump in one of these major cases that have gone before the court since he returned to power in January. Now, we are still going through this case, but this is something we have been waiting for. The court said that it would take up this case on an expedited basis. So they're deciding, even though it's a significant case now, because of course this has enormous implications.
Trump's attorneys listened in stunned silence as the judge systematically dismantled each pillar of their appeal. The argument that presidential authority somehow extended to imposing tariffs without congressional approval collapsed under the weight of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which explicitly grants such powers exclusively to the legislative branch. The Founding Fathers had been remarkably clear on this point, and no amount of creative legal interpretation could rewrite the plain text that had governed American law for centuries. The scene grew increasingly dramatic as the ruling continued. One of Trump's lead attorneys, a lawyer who had successfully navigated countless high-stakes cases, physically stumbled backward when the panel announced their unanimous decision. Witnesses described the moment as haunting, comparing it to watching someone receive a terminal diagnosis. Another member of the legal team dropped his head into his hands, unable to watch as the judges continued their brutal dissection of every remaining legal argument.
The U.S. Appeals Court has ruled that most of President Trump's tariffs are illegal. The judges said while the president had considerable powers to respond to national emergencies, these didn't explicitly include the power to impose tariffs or taxes. President Trump used a power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act when he implemented his reciprocal tariffs, which have been a cornerstone of his foreign policy. The court said the duties can remain in place until the middle of October to allow for the case to be heard by the Supreme Court. The decision doesn't affect tariffs issued under other legal authorities, such as those on steel or aluminium. Mr. Trump has called the ruling incorrect. He posted on his Truth Social platform earlier saying all tariffs are still in effect, calling the court highly partisan, and said that incorrectly said the tariffs should be removed. But he said they know the United States of America will win in the end. Mr. Trump went on to say if these tariffs ever went away, it would be a total disaster for the country.
But it wasn't just the rejection that cut so deeply. The judges went further, calling out specific instances of procedural bad faith that transformed this from a simple legal loss into something far more damaging. The court found evidence that Trump's team had engaged in document concealment, attempting to obscure facts from judicial review. This finding transformed the ruling from a mere rejection into an active judicial rebuke, a statement that Trump's legal team had not simply made weak arguments, but had actively attempted to deceive the court. The implications of this finding ripple far beyond this single case. When one federal court determines that a party has engaged in bad faith conduct and concealment, every other judge in the country takes notice. This ruling essentially labels Trump's legal team as untrustworthy in every jurisdiction where they practice. Prosecutors in other cases are already citing this decision as evidence of a pattern of deception that should color every future legal proceeding involving the former president. The uniform nature of this rejection carries particular significance.
New at 11, this morning the Supreme Court ruled that President Donald Trump did not have the authority to impose certain global tariffs without approval from Congress. In a 6-3 decision, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that federal law requires congressional authorization before a president can implement tariffs of that scope. The ruling addresses the limits of executive power under existing trade and emergency statuses.
These were partisan judges divided along ideological lines, issuing a split decision that could be dismissed as politically motivated. 3 federal appeals court judges, appointed by presidents from different administrations, reviewed all the evidence and arguments and arrived at exactly the same conclusion. Trump's appeal was completely without merit, and his attempts to delay justice through procedural maneuvering would no longer be tolerated. Legal experts watching the proceedings expressed shock at the speed of the decision. Appeals courts typically take significant time to review complex cases, carefully considering arguments, sometimes sending cases back for reconsideration or further fact-finding. This panel needed no such deliberation. They took one look at Trump's appeal and effectively laughed it out of court, producing a ruling that will be studied in law schools for generations as an example of how not to argue a case before the federal judiciary. The judges explicitly rejected Trump's attempts to relitigate issues that had already been decided in lower courts. His team wasn't raising legitimate legal questions worthy of appellate review. They were attempting to use the appeals process as a stalling tactic, a way to delay the inevitable consequences of their clients' actions. The judges saw through this immediately and were clearly offended by the attempt to abuse the appellate system. One judge reportedly interrupted oral arguments with a sharp rebuke, telling Trump's attorneys that they were asking the court to ignore established facts and settled law, something the panel absolutely refused to do. The atmosphere in that courtroom had been building for months. Trump's legal strategy had always relied on delay, on procedural complexity, on creating so many legal hurdles that justice would simply run out of time and patience. That strategy had worked remarkably well for years, allowing him to avoid accountability while his opponents grew frustrated and his supporters grew emboldened. But federal judges have long memories and even longer patience, and they had clearly reached the end of their tolerance. What made this moment so catastrophic for Trump was the recognition that this was his last real avenue to avoid immediate legal consequences. The appeals court didn't merely reject his lawsuit, they affirmed lower court decisions, denied any further stays, and essentially told every other court in America that Trump's delay tactics were over. The ruling paves the way for imminent legal proceedings that had been frozen pending appeal, allowing multiple cases to move forward simultaneously. The downstream effects of this ruling are already cascading through Trump's other legal battles with devastating speed. Prosecutors in different jurisdictions are citing the appeals court's findings of bad faith and concealment as evidence in their own cases. using the ruling to bolster arguments that Trump's entire legal strategy has been based on deception. Judges who might have previously been patient with procedural delays are now expediting proceedings, having received the clear message that the era of Trump's legal gamesmanship has officially concluded. The complete collapse of Trump's legal defenses represents a seismic shift in the landscape of American justice. For years, the former president had operated as if the rules didn't apply to him, as if his wealth and power would always provide some escape hatch from accountability. That illusion has now been shattered, and what remains is the stark reality of a man facing multiple legal consequences with no procedural protection left to shield him. Trump's legal team is reportedly in complete disarray following this devastating rejection. Some attorneys are desperately exploring the possibility of Supreme Court review, even though legal experts universally agree there's absolutely no basis for such an appeal. Others have shifted focus to negotiating plea deals, recognizing that trial now seems inevitable and that the evidence against their client is overwhelming. Still, other lawyers are quietly attempting to withdraw from Trump's cases, not wanting to be associated with the legal catastrophe that's about to unfold. The unity and confidence that Trump's legal team once projected has been replaced by finger-pointing and outright panic. Attorneys who were once happy to appear on television declaring their client's innocence are now avoiding media inquiries, unwilling to discuss the implosion of their legal strategy. The team's internal dynamics have deteriorated to the point where some lawyers are openly blaming others for the disastrous ruling, creating an atmosphere of dysfunction that further weakens Trump's position. The financial implications of this ruling are potentially catastrophic. Trump's legal bills have already reached astronomical levels, and now he faces multiple simultaneous proceedings with no way to delay them. He can no longer drag things out to negotiate better settlements or use procedural delays to avoid judgments. The financial judgments that were pending can now be enforced immediately, putting his entire fortune at risk in ways that his lawyers can no longer protect. Civil cases that were stayed pending appeal can now proceed, potentially exposing Trump to billions in damages. Criminal investigations that were paused can resume, with prosecutors now free to move aggressively toward indictment and trial. Sentencing hearings that were delayed can happen, with judges ready to impose consequences that have been years in the making. It's like a dam breaking, with all the legal consequences Trump had been holding back through procedural maneuvering now free to flow. The political implications of this judicial smackdown are equally severe. Trump can no longer claim he's winning in court or that judges are on his side. The narrative of persecution falls apart when federal appeals courts are unanimously calling your arguments meritless and finding evidence of deception. Even Trump's most ardent supporters are having difficulty spinning this as anything other than a complete defeat, with the legal losses translating directly into political weakness. Public perception has shifted dramatically with this ruling. The image of Trump being dragged through the legal system, his appeals denied, his lies exposed, is defining his legacy in ways that no political spin can overcome. Even people who supported Trump politically are having trouble defending someone whose own legal arguments have been labeled meritless by federal judges. The narrative has shifted from Trump the fighter to Trump the loser, a man who can't even win in court with expensive lawyers and years of preparation. The precedent this sets for other wealthy defendants attempting to abuse the legal system is significant. The appeals court has essentially declared that procedural gamesmanship won't be tolerated, that bad faith arguments will be called out, and that attempting to delay justice through frivolous appeals will backfire spectacularly. Trump's failed strategy might actually result in faster justice for other defendants, as courts become less tolerant of obvious delay tactics in the wake of this historic ruling. Trump's political future hangs by the thinnest thread following this ruling. You cannot effectively run for office when you're facing imminent sentencing and multiple trials. You cannot claim to be a victim of persecution when federal appeals courts are unanimously calling your arguments meritless. You cannot maintain political support when even your own lawyers are abandoning you, and the legal system has declared you a bad faith actor who tried to abuse the judicial process. The historical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. We are witnessing the complete collapse of a former president's legal defenses in real time, an unprecedented event in American history. The federal judiciary has essentially declared that Trump is a bad faith actor who attempted to manipulate the legal system and failed. This will be studied in law schools for generations as an example of how even the wealthy and powerful cannot escape justice forever when the evidence against them is overwhelming. Observers in the courtroom described the scene as absolutely explosive. When the judges announced their ruling, the lead prosecutor maintained professional composure, but those watching closely could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He had just witnessed Trump's legal defense get completely annihilated by federal judges who were clearly fed up with the constant lies and obstruction. The prosecutors had built their case carefully, and the court's ruling validated every argument they had made. The speed and decisiveness of this rejection shocked even Trump's harshest critics. Usually, appeals courts take time to consider arguments carefully, sometimes sending cases back for reconsideration when they find procedural issues. But this panel needed no such deliberation. They took one look at Trump's appeal and effectively laughed it out of court, producing a ruling that legal experts are calling historically significant in its harshness. The phrase meritless appeared multiple times in their ruling, alongside other damaging phrases like bad faith, obstruction, and attempts to mislead the court. When federal judges use language this harsh, they aren't just rejecting your case, they're angry at you for wasting their time with obvious lies. The court's frustration with Trump's legal team was palpable, and their decision reflected a judicial system that had finally reached its breaking point. The sentencing implications of this ruling are particularly severe for Trump. Judges who were waiting for appeals to be resolved can now impose sentences immediately, and given the appeals court's finding of bad faith and obstruction, they are likely to impose harsher penalties than they might have otherwise. Trump isn't just facing legal consequences, he's facing angry judges who feel their courts were abused and their time wasted. That anger translates into longer sentences and fewer opportunities for leniency. Criminal investigations that were effectively frozen by Trump's appeals can now accelerate toward indictment and trial with breathtaking speed. Prosecutors who were building cases but holding back due to pending appeals are now free to move forward aggressively, armed with the appeals court's finding that Trump engaged in document concealment. This gives prosecutors additional evidence and potentially additional charges, as every delay tactic Trump used is now becoming evidence against him. The financial consequences of this ruling are catastrophic in ways that extend beyond immediate legal judgments. Trump's ability to secure loans and business partnerships will be severely compromised by the finding that he engaged in bad faith conduct and document concealment. Banks and investors who might have previously overlooked legal troubles will now have documented judicial findings to consider, making it virtually impossible for Trump to obtain the financing he needs to maintain his business empire. The removal of stays and barriers to accountability means that everything that was on hold pending appeal can now move forward immediately. Sentencing that was delayed can happen. Criminal investigations that were paused can resume. Civil cases that were stayed can proceed. It's like a dam breaking, with all the legal consequences Trump had been holding back through procedural maneuvering now free to flow. His lawyers are facing a tsunami of legal actions with no way to stop them. Trump's legal team is reportedly in complete chaos following this rejection, with some attorneys trying to figure out if there's any possibility of Supreme Court review, even though experts say there's no basis for it. Others are focused on negotiating plea deals now that trial seems inevitable. Still others are quietly trying to withdraw from Trump's cases, not wanting to be associated with what's coming next. The unity and confidence that Trump's legal team once projected has been replaced by finger-pointing and panic. The political implications of this judicial smackdown are severe and immediate. Trump can no longer claim he's winning in court or that judges are on his side. The narrative of persecution falls apart when federal appeals courts are calling your arguments meritless and finding evidence of deception. Even Trump's supporters are having difficulty spinning this as anything other than a complete defeat. The legal losses are translating into political weakness. Looking ahead, Trump faces a bleak, immediate future of courtrooms, sentences, and judgments. The appeals court's rejection means there are no more delays, no more stays, no more procedural escapes. Justice that was delayed for years is about to be delivered swiftly and harshly. Trump's shock at this courtroom moment is justified. He just lost his last shield against accountability, and what's coming next is going to be brutal. The bottom line is this. The federal appeals court's devastating rejection of Trump's meritless appeal, combined with findings of document concealment and bad faith, represents the complete collapse of his legal defense strategy. The shocking courtroom moment where Trump was effectively dragged through a judicial reckoning marks the end of his ability to delay or avoid justice. His legal team is in ruins. His arguments have been exposed as lies, and the path to his accountability is now clear and immediate. The man who thought he could manipulate the legal system forever just discovered that federal judges have limits, and he's crossed them all. The shock on Trump's face in that courtroom was the look of someone realizing that the game is over and he lost. Every judge, every prosecutor, every legal observer who watched this unfold understood the historical significance of what they were witnessing. This ruling does more than just reject an appeal. It transforms the entire legal landscape surrounding Trump, signaling to every jurisdiction and every judge that the former president's procedural games are over. Courts that might have previously given Trump the benefit of the doubt will now view him through the lens of this ruling, a lens that reveals a pattern of bad faith conduct and document concealment. The phrase "dragged through a legal reckoning" that observers use to describe the scene captures the helplessness of Trump's position. His lawyers weren't making arguments anymore, they were just trying to minimize damage. They weren't fighting to win, they were begging for mercy. The federal appeals court gave them none, instead delivering what one legal expert called a judicial execution of Trump's remaining defenses. Prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions are already moving to take advantage of this ruling, filing motions that cite the appeals court's findings as evidence of Trump's pattern of deception. The legal system is mobilizing with a speed that would have been unthinkable just months ago, recognizing that the era of Trump's impunity has ended and the era of accountability has finally arrived. The downstream effects of this ruling will be felt for years, not just in Trump's cases, but in the broader legal system. Courts are becoming less tolerant of delay tactics, less willing to entertain frivolous appeals, and less patient with wealthy defendants who think they can buy their way out of justice. Trump's failed strategy has inadvertently made the legal system stronger, teaching judges that the most effective way to deal with procedural abuse is to call it out loudly and clearly. The historical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. We are watching the complete collapse of a former president's legal defenses in real time, an event that will be studied for generations. The federal judiciary has essentially declared that Trump is a bad faith actor who tried to abuse the legal system and failed. This will be studied in law schools as an example of how even the wealthy and powerful can't escape justice forever if the evidence against them is overwhelming. Trump's political future is essentially over following this ruling. You can't run for office when you're facing imminent sentencing and multiple trials. You can't claim to be a victim of persecution when federal appeals courts are unanimously calling your arguments meritless. You can't maintain political support when even your own lawyers are abandoning you. This judicial rejection isn't just a legal defeat, it's the end of Trump as a political force. The immediate consequences of this ruling are already unfolding. Multiple legal proceedings against Trump can now move forward at full speed. We're talking about criminal trials, civil lawsuits, and sentencing hearings, all happening potentially simultaneously. Trump's calendar is about to be nothing but courtrooms, and his lawyers can't stop it. The era of strategic delay that protected Trump for years just ended with shocking finality. 3 federal judges unanimously rejected Trump's appeal as meritless, effectively ending his legal delay tactics, and now financial judgments can be enforced immediately, putting his entire fortune at risk. The ruling marks a judicial rebuke that publicly shamed his legal team and definitively exposed his claims as baseless. Even supporters are struggling to defend him.